Hello and welcome to Get Rich Slow, the podcast that challenges the conventional get rich quick ideology and instead explores what success really means and how you can achieve it. I'm Hannah Martin, the founder of Talent Ladies Club, and today I am joined by Dr. Stefaan Vossen. He is Doctor of Chiropractic and founder of Core Clinics, and I want to talk to him about healthy bodies. So hello, Stefaan, Dr. Stefaan, or just Stefaan.
Don't bother with that. Call me Stefaan by all means. Hello, Hannah. Lovely to meet you, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, no, it's a real pleasure. This is a subject I'm very much interested in. But before we dig into our bodies and health, can I ask you what success means to you?
Yeah, so that was like when I got that question, I had never really thought about it in a conscious way. And the thing that I came to realize is that it has changed a lot, a huge amount, in fact. I would say, to answer the question directly, for me, success today is to be able to identify, enforce, and challenge your boundaries. And that really sits at the core of a huge number of shifts that I've made personally in terms of my own understanding of, you know, what I'm worth and the self-respect that sits at the bottom of that. And so where that in the past, I would have defined success as an external event, something that is judged by others, that is judged by, let's call it, you know, financial success, or the number of people you have on staff, or the number of accolades that you have to your name. And that it was this external validation, essentially. And that has changed massively. You could call it maturity, you could call it a revelation, you could call it insight, whatever. For me, it was the process of realizing that actually I wasn't per se doing the things that felt right for me on my terms, and that included that humanity of myself and the people that are working with me. But actually, as I've gotten, call it older, whatever it is, I've come to realize that when you are able to respect the space from which you come, and respect that you are in that event, in that moment, and that you're fully there, that to me is the ultimate form of success. What comes from that is really dependent on things that are outside of your control. If you happen to find yourself in a world where your attributes and your traits, your height, your physical traits, your intellectual traits, your, you know, storytelling trait, your abilities, whatever they are, if you happen to find yourself in a society that celebrates those financially or with accolades or whatever, then other people will then say, oh, that's success. But in reality, it all starts from the point of, are you actually respecting where you're coming from? And do you understand what your boundaries are? And still have a willingness to push those boundaries, because I also believe that there is a phenomenal amount of meaning in considering, meditating, if you wish, over what your boundaries are, and really acquiring the skill in order to expand them and include further abilities, and actually believing that you can grow, that you can develop, but always in the light of an understanding of what your attributes are. There's no point in trying to be something that you're not. That is the high road to hell, as far as I'm concerned. And it's a dreadful disease that we get afflicted with from a very young age onwards. And I think that in reality, we need to be very, very careful with what we say to our colleagues, what we say to our friends, what we say to our children, and really get them to understand that a lot of those success narratives that are being presented in social media or business literature, etc., are perhaps the narratives of others, but don't need to be their narrative. And I think that is really when you start to own your success, whatever that is defined by. So yeah, that's like, in short, as it's become an internal observation about what are my motives, what do I feel is just, what do I feel is fair. And I found, you know, it was very, very resonant with me about the title of the podcast, with the Get Rich Slow, because in reality, there are ways in which that I could be deemed far more successful than I currently am by peers or by my accountant or by my bank manager, if I were only to sacrifice certain of my personal views, values, and things that I find important. But then, you know, on the back of that, the price that takes out of you as an individual is so enormous that, quite frankly, I'd rather die poor doing what is my success than to die rich having violated those principles. So yeah, that resonates very, very strongly for me.
Thank you. That's actually, it's interesting, you started that by talking about external and internal validation, which interestingly, I've asked about 30 people now that question. Not one person has said, oh, success is a Ferrari on my driveway or anything external or that 100,000 followers. They've all talked about actually time and freedom and other things that often come up. And I think I love that you verbalizing it there, internal, external success, and everything you just said is why I started this podcast in the first place. And
fantastic.
So yeah, so thank you. I totally agree with everything that you've said. It's my belief system as well. But on to you and your career. So what is chiropractic that you are a doctor of?
So chiropractic is actually a healthcare philosophy. It's a healthcare philosophy that approaches the question of health not by saying what is this patient suffering from, but is actually saying what are the reasons why this person's body is not recovering in the way that nature would normally have it. So my team and I have the most phenomenal team, and it's really lovely to be invited to talk about success and all the rest of it, but I can't really have that conversation without acknowledging the fact that I've got the most incredible administrative and clinical team and support team behind me, including my wife that you have been speaking to, who is actually the real boss, and I'm just the face of it. And when you're looking at understanding what we're trying to do at the clinic, but what the core of chiropractic philosophy is, it's really about understanding what are the reasons why a person's body is not able to restore themselves to good health. And of course, that then invites a whole myriad of possibilities. So yes, there might be injuries that have had a detrimental effect on how that person's body works. Absolutely. Sometimes they might have been surgically altered due to injuries or other problems. It might be that they're born with, let's call them defects. I hate that word. They're variables, variants that exist, and we need to accept. Kind of going back to the point of attributes and traits of earlier. You know, and within the context of that individual, if there are things that person does, whether it be physically, whether it be mentally, whether it be driven by nutritional habits, whether it be driven by things that they just do, maybe not even knowingly, that they just do automatically, that undermine their ability to heal. And that is the basic principle. And it's about identifying the reasons behind that and then offering remedies to those reasons within a narrative, within a healthcare narrative that has been built up together with the patient. And that's also a very important difference, because a lot of the time what we do as conventional doctors is actually to say, your healthcare narrative is that you have this disease and here is the treatment for that disease. And ultimately that divorces the individual quite strongly, in my opinion, at times, from the sense that actually under the right circumstances, with the right kind of self-care, with the right kind of understanding of who and what they are, they would probably not be in that situation. Now, of course, there's a number of exceptions to this. Okay, so it has to be said that this healthcare philosophy only applies within a certain aspect of the healthcare spectrum. So if somebody's been run over by a bus and needs their tibia pinning, then that's what needs doing. There's no point having a health philosophy. That is a sickness or a trauma philosophy. The same applies to a variety of other diseases that, you know, diabetes, type 1 diabetes, that is no one's fault. You know, that is not something that you either chose, created, you know, that is a genetic situation that it would be entirely wrong to put that into that bracket. So it is really about the preservation or the restoration and preservation of health in and by the patient themselves, with the assistance of external help and guidance from people that have the expertise, the knowledge, the experience in that particular field. Now, our clinic at Core in Hatton is somewhat unusual, because whilst I'm sitting here as indeed a titled chiropractor, the reality is that what we're doing there is we've expanded on that philosophy, and we've taken it from just the pure spinal, the back pain, the neck pain, the whiplash, the traumatic incidents, and we've expanded the same philosophy into saying, well, hang on a minute, if this patient is suffering with a great deal of inflammation, and that they are suffering with a great deal of inflammation that is adding to their pain experience, then let's look at what other things they do. Okay, they might be drinking a lot, or even drinking at all, to be honest with you, because alcohol is the devil as far as I'm concerned. Secondly, they might be eating badly. They might be eating high carbohydrates, or highly refined foods, etc., etc. And that might be rooted in just a lack of knowledge. You know, it might be just rooted in, I don't know what to do, because that's what I inherited from my family. That's what I've always eaten. And everybody else in my surroundings still does. So I feel pressurized to continue doing so, because that's also a complicated aspect of it. Because sometimes you have to involve an entire community around the healing of the individual. So we've expanded that across into nutrition, into psychology, and even into spirituality, because there are many aspects of how we relate to ourselves that are not just about understanding in the rational sense, but also about how you feel, how you connect with both yourself and your community, your tribe. You know, it's a lovely buzzword that's been around for a little bit, but actually it's absolutely true. You know, understanding how you connect with people at the deeper level is incredibly important in order to be able to reflect on how you connect with yourself. And a lot of the time, it really just boils down to understanding why people do things that aren't good for them. And obviously there's a smorgasbord of possibilities there, from the traumatic to the incidental to the completely occasional indoctrination that happened without you even knowing. So there are many aspects to that, if done well. But the chiropractic philosophy in and of itself applies that theory, that philosophy, if you like, to the spinal events, and we have expanded it to actually your ability to embrace health as a whole. And to us, that has proven to be both very effective for patients, because people do recognize more and more these days. I would say there's definitely a significant awakening in that space, that we are multidimensional beings in that sense. We're not just the job we do. We're not just the children we have. We're not just the clothes we wear, etc. We are a whole bunch of other things. And to be able to engage with patients on that level, and then be able to break down some of the things that distort, and helping them to actually replace those with better options, incredibly valuable. Chiropractors in and of themselves will do that by manipulating the spine, by giving advice, nutritional advice, even a light form of counseling. But personally, I don't feel comfortable sitting in that space as an expert, because I'm not an expert. You know, there's only that much that I can know, and I want to know it well. So I engage other people, orthotic specialists, nutritionists, naturopaths, GPs, psychologists, and so on, to each be really good at that bit. So then we can create a health experience or a healthcare experience where each of these people gets around the patient when appropriate and when necessary, and then give them the information that they need, give them the guidance, give them the pushes sometimes, the confidence sometimes, to actually say, no, you can do this. You absolutely can do this. But of course, sometimes the steps seem too big, so we then break them down. And that to me is chiropractic philosophy, and chiropractic as it is at its best, personally.
So it's interesting. I mean, it sounds like this is more sort of empowering. Because when you talked about in a traditional thing, I go to the doctor, I have a problem, and they will prescribe me pills or prescribe me surgery, or, you know, maybe recommend me for counselling. But often there's I think that the patient is helpless. You know, the doctor is going to take responsibility for your health, whereas what you're talking about is a much more holistic approach, and saying that actually you may come here with sciatica, for example, and there are physical things that we can do to relieve that, but actually there may be other things contributing to this, and you have a responsibility, you have a part to play. There are some things, as you say, that can happen that, you know, so cancers and things like that just aren't our fault. You know, we can reduce risk, for example, but sometimes we can live a healthy life and that can happen to us. But there's a part to play, there's a balance, isn't there, between healthcare and the patients.
Well,
we have responsibility.
I think what you're touching on there is the differential between healthcare and sickness care. And I come from a family of a lot of clinicians. There's about 26, 27 in my family, of a variety of disciplines. And I say this with the greatest respect. My father was an incredible GP, you know, with an exceptional knowledge of tropical diseases, which is one of the hardest fields to wrap your head around. But the reality is, and he will back that up any day, because we've had many conversations about this, the applicability of the sick care narrative is being overextended into the healthcare space. And the GPs, and I have many friends in that field, I have many patients in that field, who will absolutely accept that and will absolutely endorse that view. And they wish that this approach, this holistic approach, as you put it, was more prevalent, because then they could actually get on with doing their job, which is sickness care. But we haven't really taken good care of the wording. We haven't taken good care of the vocabulary around these things. And in reality, the GP today, for example, who would love to say to this patient, listen, you should take care of this yourself. They themselves have been disempowered to a very high degree, institutionally, organizationally, but also by the patients, because the patients come at them with an expectation of a quick fix, of an easy, cheap solution for something that, quite frankly, that's a distorted view of yourself. If that's all you think you're worth, something easy in order for you to be your best self, then you really need to investigate that. However, if you're in the middle of an asthma attack, or you're having a bacterial infection of some sort, give me all the antibiotics, give me the salbutamol, of course, because you're dealing with a crisis, you're dealing with a situation that, if it is not dealt with there and then in the most efficient way, you're going to cause a lot of damage. And so once you're out of that more extreme end of that healthcare spectrum, there needs to be an invitation. There needs to be a real and meaningful invitation to say, and now you do this. And that is the bit, that bridging movement is still developing. I mean, I don't think it is quite as prevalent as many of my colleagues, whether in my field or associated fields, would like to see a lot more of that. And the GPs and the consultants would like to see the same, but we're kind of stuck at the moment where that it is the market, it is the individual patients who have to make that choice to come and investigate what that's all about.
Do you think that we take enough responsibility for our personal health? I mean, we look at, and I think actually, like, the lifespan is actually declining. I might be wrong about this, but you know, obesity is on the rise. We are less probably physically active than previous generations. Our diet as well, so we rely more on convenience food and processed foods. Do you think that in looking at this very holistic version of healthcare, whereby, like, it's not just a sickness, you've got a heart attack here, but actually there are things that we can do to be healthier, do you think that right now that we're not taking enough responsibility as a nation or a generation?
So the problem with the question is that responsibility requires you to know what's possible. You can only take as much responsibility as you have been told you can. And we are currently in a situation where that we've kind of lived on the apex of celebrating what medicine can do. And yes, you could call it over-reliance. You could call it abdication of responsibility. But how can you know if you don't know? And so I'm very careful with that question, because if I say yes, we should, then really what I'm saying is, why don't you? To anybody that's listening or watching this podcast. And I think that's fundamentally a wrong question. I think the basic point that we got to start off with is, did you know that you can? And that when you do, there is a whole new world out there for you. Now, again, does that apply to everyone? To a more or less degree, a greater or lesser degree, yes, but it might not be satisfactory. Because if you are born with a series of traits, a series of attributes, whether it's diseases, whether you've acquired them, no fault to your own, who am I to say that you should do all these things to be a little bit better? Because the fundamental issue is that if you don't produce insulin, you're just not going to. You're going to die. So the relationship with responsibility is a very interesting one, but at the same time, a very, I feel, delicate one that we need to be careful with. But if we skip that point and we say that we understand one another what's meant and intended by responsibility, then yes, absolutely. But at the same time, I would also say that up until relatively recently, how could you? Where's the information coming from? How do you know what's real? How do you know whether something is that is being promoted as the umpteenth Instagram post that you see because it's on your timeline has any validity or value? And that's where I actually blame my colleagues and myself more than anything else. I don't see the point in blaming the individual people, because that is not your job. Our job is to empower you. Our job is to teach you. Remember, doctor is the Latin for teacher. That's our primary job. But healthcare should be 90% education and 10% care. And so that is where we, as a breed of professionals, have failed. Now, okay, I exclude consultants and surgeons in this because they are procedural people. They're expert at producing a particular procedure and a particular hopeful outcome from that. But the people that sit around that should be taking care of all of those things. That's our fault. That's not the public's fault. We've not done anything akin to enough to actually be even anywhere near being able to blame the public for the situation that we're in. And then you can also talk about governments and what they allow, and you can talk about local areas and the habits that they get into and all the rest of it. I mentioned alcohol before. That stuff should be illegal. It should be a Class A drug. There's nothing good to be said about alcohol. Literally, there's nothing that you can possibly say to defend the existence of alcohol. Sugar, refined sugar, same thing. Should be Class A drug. One of the most highly addictive substances on the planet. And yet we sell it at the boatload. Why? Because it's taxable. Why? Because nobody ever actually rejected or questioned that point. Well, it's being questioned all over the place, but nobody's doing anything about it. So I think that there's a conflation of a variety of issues between a society that is very busy and that is being told to pay a lot of attention to what other people think of us, an educational system that is about giving us information but not educating us, and a medical system that doesn't have time to educate us and make it clear to us that we should. And then of course also, like I said, the governments and institutions that make it very hard to actually hit the message home. So between all of that, it's impossible for me to blame anyone other than that conflation of things. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so adamant about what we do. And I don't really care what it looks like to others or how much money it makes. It's the right thing to do, full stop. So as far as I'm concerned, that's it for me.
So what do you think about, so obviously you're going to say no alcohol, no sugar, or maybe you're not, I don't know. We might part ways on the alcohol opinion, but anyway. But what would you say, so looking at the patients that come through your clinic, mm-hmm. and the kind of some of the more common issues, or common lifestyle things that you see causing the most damage, what would you say are some of the things that we generally, people make mistakes on, even people who may be trying to live healthy lives,
mm-hmm.
that if you could give them advice and say, don't do these things and do more of these things, what would they be?
So I would actually, I'm going to go back to the alcohol thing. It's not that I take the view that things should be banned altogether. I don't believe that. Okay. In fact, I don't believe that that is the way to anything. What I believe is that we need to give people the information to make decisions about what happens to people when they make bad decisions. That's one aspect. The other aspect of it is also, I now currently have a lovely bottle of a Belgian Abbey beer resting in my fridge, which I will thoroughly enjoy tonight by the fireplace. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do things that are bad for you. Okay, what I'm saying is that you have to understand the effect that these things have on you, and take a view on whether that is acceptable to you. No one can tell you that you're right or wrong. You crack on, you know, you do you, and whether that is with food, with alcohol, with exercise, with whatever it is, just know that the only person that is responsible for that choice is you. And once you can truly make a choice, because that's the other thing, a lot of people don't make choices. They think they make choices, but what they do is actually just fulfill an addiction. And that is not a choice. That is following your brain's urges. And so you have to be very careful when people say, well, I'm choosing to drink this, I'm choosing to eat this, etc. Are you really? Does it make you feel good? Are you actually saying that you're doing this because this fulfills something in your life? Or are you saying that it is distracting you from something in your life? Or are you saying that it is a way to alleviate a discomfort in your life? Now, then you're having an honest conversation, because in truth, that conversation always ends up in, yes, I am indeed hiding, alleviating, distracting myself from X, Y, Z. Now, then you get into a really interesting space, I think, because then it becomes a much more intimate working relationship. But to go back to your actual question, I think that there is no single one thing that, and we need to get away from this. Wearing high heels is not bad for your back. I don't care what Vogue says. It's not true. I know there was this lovely fashion some years ago about the huge handbags. It had a name, the boho chic. And within 5 minutes, you had every physio, chiro, osteopath publishing articles about how dreadful that stuff is for you. Nonsense, utter nonsense. It's the human body is an incredible thing that has an incredible ability to cope. And unless it is challenged in a meaningful way, in an intentional way, unless it's challenged, you never understand what your boundaries are. You never know what you're capable of, and you never grow, which is even worse. So this kind of helicopter parenting on your own body, that I certainly don't advocate that either. No, go out, go into the wild, go and figure out, do things that are dangerous, do things that are exciting, do things, drink things you shouldn't do, eat whatever, it doesn't matter. But know what the effect is that it has had on you, acknowledge it, and then incorporate it into your learnings and move forwards. So for me, that's really what that's about. And if you are looking for like a one-size-cookie cutter solution that says, well, if you do this and this and this, you'll be well and you'll be healthy and all the rest of it. No, it doesn't exist. That's a fantasy that we get sold by top 10s lists on YouTube and on Instagram and all the rest. It's nonsense. What we've got to do is identify what our attributes are, what we're made of, what we respond to. I respond badly to dairy. That's not to say that everybody else does. Who am I to tell you that that you shouldn't eat dairy? If you feel good with it, go on. Absolutely no problem with that. And there is no single answer, no single one answer to these things. And I think we first and foremost need to get away of that kind of let's solve it by doing stuff. No. Get to the core of why you do things, then behave from there, and then you will solve things automatically, because you learn to listen to what is actually, what helps you and what hinders you to express your best self. And I think that's when you start to talk about real health, whether that is your best physical self, your best mental self, your best productive self. You know, I'm a very firm believer in productivity being a very positive guide. I also believe in vanity being a very productive guide. You know, it's something that helped me lose 3 stone, because I was looking at myself in the mirror at one point and I went, that's not a happy body. What's going on with you? Right. And then I figured out that I was testosterone deficient. And then I figured out that I really needed to start hitting the gym and eating differently. And that vanity that started that process, I'm very glad of it. But again, we live in a culture that says, oh, vanity is bad, or it's excessive, or whatever. No, it's all that was part of my healthcare narrative, my healthcare adventure. And I embraced it and I owned it. And I would say that as long as you can own whatever it is that you're in that moment, and you're building towards something that is more meaningful to you, then you're right on the path. And I'd love to give you like hard examples that somehow people find helpful, but I don't really know if I can.
So it seems like then that it's less about like hard and fast rules, like eat 5 portions of veg a day and do an hour of exercise, but more about listening to, so like, for example, I might like a glass of white wine on a Friday night, and that makes me feel relaxed and calm, and I'm not doing it because I feel any kind of compulsion or whatever. It's just something like you do with your beer and I enjoy it. But someone else might drink that wine and it makes them feel bad, or they then have to have 4 more glasses of wine because it's triggered something. So it sounds like it's more about listening to, when does your body and your mind feel good, and then identifying where that might come from, and almost creating a personal plan for yourself that might also change throughout your life as well. Like you say, like, you know, me being a perimenopausal woman, you know, looking at adapting things in my life that change for me, and also thinking about exercise. You know, I do yoga, I love yoga, it really suits me. Can't run, I hate running, it makes you miserable. So it's not just one form of exercise that would work for everyone. Is that a fair? That
is exactly it. That's exactly it. And I think any deviation from that, I find it utterly unhelpful. I think it becomes it takes stranglehold on people, and it reduces them to try things that works for other people. But the challenge here is actually to, when you say what makes me feel good, now that therein lies the problem, because what makes me feel good might, when I'm just going through heartbreak, what makes me feel good might be to get attention from another woman, or it might be to drink myself drunk in order to forget the pain that I was in. Still makes me feel good. And would I say don't do it? No, actually, do you know what? Do it. By all means, do it. Because you will feel terrible afterwards. And out of that, you know, this obsession with positive is also something that I find very problematic, actually. I refer to it as toxic positivity. You know, everything has got to be good. Yeah, it's like, no. I've learned some of my most valuable lessons when I was at my lowest and was experiencing the most horrible feelings and emotions. So I certainly wouldn't say avoid these things. No, do that, follow that. But when you feel rotten about having done it, stop, think, why am I doing this? Why did I put so much importance in this relationship that I'm prepared to find myself in the gutter? Why do I care so much about what my bank manager says that I find myself snorting cocaine in the bathrooms in the pub? Why do I? Because somehow, and ultimately the conclusion is always the same, because I'm afraid. You know, because I'm afraid of aging, because I'm afraid of death, because I'm afraid of not being valued, not being safe, not being recognized as being of value. Ultimately, that's what sits at the bottom of it all, always. And so once you can own that, and you can really start to investigate what part of my history, my experiences, has massaged my self-perception to such a degree that it doesn't exist unless it's validated by others, well, until then you're going to suffer. That's the bottom line. And that's what suffering brings. It's a gift, you know. And again, I want to be very careful here, because there's some people whose suffering is certainly not in that category. Okay, so just to be clear. But a lot of human suffering is actually a gift that invites you to reevaluate where your center is. Is it in you, or is it in others? Is it in approval from your mom and dad, of your colleagues, of your boss, of your husband, of your wife, whatever it is? Or is it actually, are you acting from the space of you? Then you can start defining what good is, but only then.
So it sounds like earlier you mentioned that you have a psychologist or a
yeah.
So yes, you must be quite busy in your clinic, I would imagine.
Well, you know, I wish it was easier to make the involvement of psychologists and counselors more prevalent. Personally, I think everyone should have a therapist, full stop. I don't understand this notional objection that people have to it. You know, how on earth can I unscramble my own mind? It doesn't work. Your mind will tell you all sorts of things. Your body will tell you all sorts of things. And so that's where experts come in. And although it is getting a lot better as of recent, in terms of people taking up the uses and the work of therapists in that way, I still think that it is somewhat not integrated with the rest of the healthcare narrative. And it needs to be much more intimate, absolutely. But we're working towards it. I mean, when I first started in practice 19 years ago, the idea of me sending a patient to a psychologist because they were suffering with headaches, you know, it would be met with utter and complete resistance. It is changing in the right direction, I believe. But then you also have issues with cost, because ultimately the more experts that need to be involved in a particular case, the more costly that these things become, because you're ultimately requiring experts' opinions and time. So I think there's a big piece of work for the clinical industry to go through to make these things more cost efficient, smoother, fewer redundant sessions, and so on, and a more integrated approach. So, for example, in our clinic, we know what the conversation, well, we don't know what the conversations were, because that is privileged, but we know what the purposes are of the conversation. And we know that we can support those purposes with our language in sessions. So we can then work, whether it's a massage therapist, or whether it's the chiropractor, or whether it's the receptionist, for all intents and purposes, that they can all take part in modifying and adapting their language in order to support that goal. And so, yes, they should be extremely busy, and they should be busier still, but we're working on it. And it's really about inviting people to, I don't know, engage with that part of them. It's still quite scary to people. I think people are still afraid of their emotions, still afraid of their minds, but that's a completely different and very long conversation.
But I love that multidisciplinary approach. Years ago, I qualified as a psychotherapist many years ago.
Brilliant.
And one of the books I read was called The Mood Cure. And it is a therapist in California, and started noticing that some of her patients had nutritional deficiencies. And so before she even treated it, she became a very popular, very busy therapist. And before she began treating patients, she would ask them to do a questionnaire and would have them do testing. And they would have to take these supplements that were carefully prescribed for each individual person before they embarked on treatment. And a number of them never needed treatment after that. And it's that way of, rather than kind of going, I've got a problem that could only be fixed. Like, I've got a headache, I will see a doctor that fixes headaches. Or I have sciatica and we'll see a doctor that physically fixes the back, rather than, as what sounds like you do, looking at it going, okay, what could be the causes for this, and actually looking beyond just one single part of the healthcare system. I want to ask you some of so you must have seen some, and I know obviously it's patient confidentiality, but you must have seen some fairly either interesting progress, as in someone came with sciatica and, you know, like they worked something else out and it was better, but it's just amazing stories of people's recovery or having a different life. Can you share some of those? if you're able.
Of millions, well, thousands. I had a lovely conversation with a gentleman I look after this morning, so it's just fresh in my mind. A young gentleman, I won't say the age, professional footballer, very high standards, England hopeful, Chelsea level player, doesn't play there now, started losing speed. Now, this is somebody who's basically build an incredible career for him. Yeah, he's a young man. And he loses speed. And in that world, it's ruthless. If you lose speed, that's it. You're down a league, like that. And he goes down the league. He goes on at first on loan, and then he contracts with another team. And he starts training there. And then he tears the hamstring, full tear of the hamstring, and then a reconstruction of that hamstring is done, reattachment surgery. 2 weeks post-surgery, he comes in to my office for the first time. So this was 8 weeks ago. And just so you know, expectations on something like that is that after 12 weeks, you get back to rehab. And then you start doing and then you have another best part of 6 weeks going through your conditioning, etc. So you're back on pitch after about 18 weeks. Yeah. And I identified that he had a problem with the pelvic brim, which was altering the firing pattern through his glutes, his bum cheek muscles, which then means that the anchoring point for his hamstring is unstable. So that's why he was losing pace. Then I went one step further and tried to identify why the pelvic brim was like that. And a significant co-component to that was that he has a leg length difference. Now, on that particular thing, by the way, everyone has one. It's just more or less significant, not per se in the height, in the effect it has on that individual. So we correct the leg length discrepancy straight away, start working, do the rehab on the pelvis. And by week 4, he's now starting to hit the recovery markers of week 8. Great, wonderful, good for you. And then we start pushing and working, and I start to say, listen, you really need to start having a word with the team healthcare, the team's healthcare management, and say, that you would like to start being tested for his rehab. They test him. He's way ahead of the curve. Now, you have to remember, this is a very young, well, not very young, it's a young man in the early 20s. He's a young man, incredibly fit, was an absolute machine to the point that everybody said, this man is going to play for England in the next 5 years. So you're already dealing with something special physically. And again, going back to the attributes, he has the attributes for that space, right? Put him in the middle of the woods hunting deer, he'd be useless. But then we started working on him and continued. And then by week 8, he is now where they were wanting him to be by week 12. Okay. So they start doing the rehab and start pushing on pitch work, side work, etc. The kind of really challenging stuff. And now they're starting to do his pace measurements. So they're starting to do his sprint speed, 60 meters, 100 meters, 20 meters, etc. And he's now outperforming his times that he had when he first came to that football club. We then had a little look at his times at Chelsea. He's now outperforming his times when he came to Chelsea. Now, this is still 10 weeks post rehab, post surgery, so completely blowing everybody's minds. Now, basically, in his context, you could say, wonderful, great work, fantastic. Now, I wanted to know what happened at Chelsea. I wanted to know what it was that made him get into a headspace where that he wasn't looking after himself, because he knew all of these things. And we had actually a very short but to the point conversation. in which I identified that somebody broke his trust whilst he was there, and it shattered him, because he lived in a space where that he was giving everything he's got all the time without withholding from anyone. And so for him, the concept of that trust being broken was so shattering that it changed his whole perspective on his relationship with his work. And basically I told him, you need to work on this. You need to understand that fundamental fracture that happened to you in that period. You need to understand what your responsibility is at. Don't blame anyone else. You chose to see it like that. They just did their job. That's a business. It's callous. It does not care about your feelings. It just looks at you like an asset. Deal with it. And now go and work on that. Now, I then got, in the evening, I got a phone call from his agent saying, I don't know what you did, but I have a superstar on my hands. Right? It was always there. I wasn't polishing a turd. I was polishing a diamond. But the reality is that that is then a valued commodity. And that is an example of how far you can go with these things. But only when the person allows you to. We have to be invited into that space. And that's why I always refer to it as, I don't create the healthcare narrative. I help you create yours. And that is really important. And there's tons of examples like that, you know, where that over time, and that's, again, that's another problem that the current healthcare system has. You know, if you're constantly seeing other people, how can you build that relationship in which that you can invite someone to help you build your healthcare narrative? It's so inconsistent. It's so bitty. It's so meaningless as well, because indeed, like you say, here's a cure, here's a tablet, here's an ointment, here's a procedure, here's a whatever. It doesn't invite you to really engage with that personal growth, that development. And it sounds like I'm talking a lot about psychology, and that's true, because ultimately everything starts with how you see the world. And when I say how you see the world, that is both physically, physiologically. Stress will reduce your field of vision. It will reduce the way you can see things. That's why you bump into things when you're stressed and angry, because you don't see them as well. You know, if you have a high inflammatory status, that affects the whole brain. It affects how you, like you were saying about the mood cure. You know, you start changing certain components, anti-inflammatory components, you start taking magnesium with vitamin D, etc., etc. It will change how you see the world and how you see yourself in that world. But as clinicians that are looking to minimize our involvement in your care, we don't want to see you any more often than you do. And you certainly don't want to pay us any more often than you have to. So, and quite rightly, you know, I often make a joke of that with my patients, but I mean that, because ultimately, if I can see you half as often by doing a quote unquote better job of this educational exercise, well, I can see twice as many patients. And a lot of clinicians struggle with that, because they believe that being so efficient will see them out of a job. To the contrary, you know, you work like that, and you'll be so busy that you keep on looking for how on earth am I going to get this patient to be less dependent, you know, to the point that I'm even thinking about installing a free gym with PTs that we employ but don't charge, just so that we can get people that need to come in currently at, let's say, once every 8 weeks. But if we can get them stronger and more self-sustaining physically by exercise, we only need to see them once every 12 weeks. Well, that means I can see 30% more patients. Thank you very much. You know, cut the waiting list, move on. Beautiful. And we need to see them less often, so they don't need to pay us as often, and they have a far more meaningful healthcare experience in the process. But you do need to have a bit of a warped sense of humor to see things like that. That I acknowledge.
Yeah, I'm very aware. I could talk to you for hours. I'm very aware of time. I have kept you a long time. I haven't asked half of the questions, but actually I can see, talking to you now, they were really ridiculous questions. I normally ask people like to sum up, like takeaway tips for people, but I can see with you it's not going to be an easy thing. But if someone's listening to this and they love your perspective, well, firstly, you tell them in a second how they can come and, you know, join your waiting list. But if they take away some piece of wisdom from you that will make their life better, what would that be?
Care only about one thing, be yourself. All the rest is distraction, nonsense, unhelpful. It's addiction creating, whether it's food, drink, clothing, TikTok. Be yourself, and take responsibility for what that means to yourself and the people around you. Accept who you are, understand your attributes, understand your traits, and if those traits are not rewarded, if those attributes are not recognized by the people you're around, change people. You're not going to change your attributes or your traits, not without killing yourself in the process anyway.
That sounds never mind medical advice. That's perfect life advice. I'm going to get my 19-year-old son to listen to this because he needs to hear that.
Well, I'm very flattered because you know what? I realized that I spent, you can call it a midlife crisis if you like, but I realized that in the years 0 to 20, you're in the process of just being. It's a wonderful space. It's incredible. However annoying that you might find your parents and the chores that you have to do and all the rest of it, that's the process of becoming yourself. By about 18, 19, 20, at least back in my years, I don't know if these things change over time, you then become what other people want you to be, need you to be, or make you feel like you need to be. And then by the time you hit your mid-40s, it's like, why am I doing this? What does this have to do with me? Whose life am I living here? And that's physically as well, for example, I came from a family of people that didn't exercise. And I come from a family of academics. What are you doing spending 2 hours a week in the gym? Why don't you read? Here's some Dostoevsky. It's like, okay. So I bought into a highly academic narrative. And I thought that was almost indulgent and vain, like I said earlier. No, do you know what? I am vain and I am indulgent and I'll have it. And I would advise anyone to be very aware and very conscious of the degree to which that we do things to please others. And have actually very little to do with what pleases us. And that goes back to what we were talking about, what feels good. Who are you trying to please? What are you trying to please? If you can act from that, I think you stand a really good chance to have the most fulfilling life. I wouldn't say per se the happiest life, but the most fulfilling life for sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Very, very, very good advice.
Doesn't sound very doctory, does it?
No, well, but then, as we just talked about in this whole podcast, actually, hopefully you'll see the doctor less if you follow that.
Exactly. Wonderful.
How can people find you if they would like to contact you or to join your waiting list or anything?
So we're based in Hatton, in the middle of Warwickshire. It's easy to get to from M42 and all the connections. That's why we went there. And we have this lovely big farmhouse in the middle of the countryside. And they can find us on the internet, www.coreclinics.co.uk. And they can email us. So there's a dedicated team that is patient care at coreclinics.co.uk. And they can then leave a message on either those platforms to say, I have an interest in evaluating certain aspects of my health, and it might be aspect A, B, or C. And then that will then be reviewed by our case manager team. The case manager team is a team of specialized clinicians, and they will then point you in the right direction. And those people will then be the closest thing to what we think is relevant to you. And then they'll guide you through that and help you out. If you're of the telephone variety, then it's 01926 801 111. But above all, have a little look on our website. I'd like to think that it is primarily an educational website, and with lots and lots of information and lots of ebooks and empowerment information. Because again, make your healthcare adventure, because that's really what it should be, an adventure, not a chore. It should be a real positive re-owning of who and what you are, and make it yours. And you know what? tell us when we're wrong as well, but make it a meaningful one.
Excellent. And just to spell out, it's Core, CORE clinic.
That's it. Yeah.
.co.uk.
Core Clinics. Yeah. CORE.
Yes.
Because we're trying to get to the core of it.
Very good. Thank you so much, Stefan.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you for having me.